They tore down my great-grandfather's bridge while I was burying him. I was still standing at the graveside with fresh dirt under my fingernails from throwing that last handful of earth on Ezra Thorne's casket when my phone started buzzing in my pocket. The video my neighbor sent hit me harder than any punch. First came the sound. Chainsaws screaming through century-old oak like they were cutting straight through my heart. Then the picture, the hand-hewn timber bridge my great-grandfather built in 1952 collapsing in a Clearwater lake in heartbreaking slow motion. Every plank he had shaped with his own calloused hands, every joint he had carved with tools that still hung in my workshop, floated away like broken pieces of our family soul. That bridge was never just wood and nails. It was the place where I learned to fish as an 8-year-old boy, worms squirming between my small fingers. It was where my father got down on one knee and proposed to my mother on a moonlit night in 1978. For 3 generations, every thorn had crossed those planks to reach our 12-acre island, our own little slice of paradise. Now, with the bridge gone, we were prisoners on our own land. The only way on or off was by boat, while the shiny new $4 million luxury resort of the Lakeside Estates, HOA, sat gleaming on the opposite shore like it was mocking us. I could picture their president, Cordelia Brightwater, standing on the resort deck with a crystal flute of champagne, smiling with satisfaction at having finally removed what she called an eyesore. What this woman with her perfectly pressed khakis and laminated rulebooks didn't know was that destroying that bridge had just pulled the plug on her entire empire. Because that old bridge wasn't only sentimental. It was the legal key to water rights worth millions. And when I finally discovered exactly what her fancy resort had been built on, it turned out some foundations are far more fragile than they look. My name is Jasper Thorne. At 45 years old, I'm what some people might call a dying breed, a third-generation boat mechanic who still builds fishing boats by hand. Motor oil is permanently stained under my fingernails, and the calluses on my palms tell the story of every piece of wood I've ever shaped. My great-grandfather Ezra wasn't just a craftsman. He was a true visionary. Back in 1952, when Clearwater Lake was nothing but a sleepy fishing spot, he bought that 12-acre island for $800 and a simple handshake. With his own hands, he built the cabin, the workshop, and that sturdy bridge. Every timber was carefully selected, every joint carved with love and precision. The smell of cedar, shavings, and fresh varnish had become my everyday cologne, and the sound of a hand-planed smoothing wood was sweeter to me than any music. Our weekend cabin sat on the island like a postcard from a simpler time, surrounded by workshop buildings where I'd spent 20 years perfecting the art of building boats. Then Cordelia Brightwater moved to the lake 3 years ago, bringing her lawyer money and her courtroom attitude with her. She was the kind of woman who ironed her khakis every single morning, drove a spotless white BMW SUV with a Rules Matter vanity plate, and never went anywhere without a leather portfolio stuffed with violation notices. Her nails were always perfectly manicured, hands that had clearly never touched real dirt. From the very first day, she made it clear she was here to upgrade the neighborhood. What used to be a peaceful community of fishing families quickly turned into a battlefield over property values and aesthetic standards. She would cruise the lake in her pristine pontoon boat, binoculars in hand, photographing anything that didn't match her vision of lakeside perfection. Our old bridge quickly became her obsession. She labeled it an unauthorized structure and an environmental hazard, even though it had been legally grandfathered and long before any zoning laws existed. She would stand on the resort deck, documenting every family member who crossed it, plotting like a general planning an invasion. The timing of the demolition was brutally calculated. Ezra had passed peacefully at 96 on a Tuesday night. The funeral was Thursday afternoon, with half the county showing up to pay respects to a man who had built boats for 3 generations of local fishermen. By Friday dawn, while I was still drained from grief, the crew arrived like an invading force. 3 trucks, a bulldozer, and chainsaws roaring through the morning mist. They claimed a 48-hour emergency safety notice had been filed while we were mourning, carefully timed to prevent any legal challenge. I will never forget those sounds. Not just the chainsaws, but the sharp crack of century-old timber snapping like gunshots. The smell of diesel exhaust mixed with the lake mist and muddy tire tracks cut across the sacred ground where my great-grandfather's ashes had been scattered only 2 days earlier. By the time my neighbor's call reached me and I raced back by boat, it was already over. 50 years of family history floated in broken pieces down Clearwater Lake, and Cordelia stood on her resort deck with a satisfied smile, watching the cleanup crew haul away the debris. The impact was immediate and devastating. My 89-year-old grandmother Dolores, still sharp as ever, could no longer visit Ezra's gravesite because she was too frail for frequent boat trips. My workshop began suffering water damage without easy access for deliveries. Property values on the island dropped sharply once buyers realized they would need a boat just to reach their own home. But the worst part was the deep sense of isolation. For the first time in 70 years, the Thorne family felt completely cut off from the community we had helped build. We had become prisoners on our own island, watching strangers enjoy the lake our great-grandfather had loved so much. That's when I started noticing the surveyors, strange men in unmarked boats, taking water depth measurements near where the bridge once stood. When I asked Cordelia about it during one of her courtesy visits, she only smiled thinly and spoke vaguely about development opportunities and highest and best use. I knew then that destroying the bridge was only the beginning of something much bigger and far more sinister. The legal harassment started exactly 1 week later. Cordelia wasn't satisfied with simply cutting off our access. She wanted to make sure we understood exactly who was in charge. First came the nuisance complaints about my boat storage being unsightly. Then the cease and desist letters claiming we were trespassing on fishing spots my great-grandfather had taught me to use. She threatened $5,000 daily fines for any unauthorized watercraft, including my grandmother's old pontoon, the rowboat I had built with my own hands, and even my nephew's kayak. The anger rose in my throat like bitter bile. This woman was trying to turn our family lake into her private playground. But growing up in a family of builders teaches you that every problem has a solution, and sometimes the best tools are the ones nobody expects you to use. While Cordelia was busy printing violation notices, I was digging through dusty boxes in my grandmother's attic. Tucked between Ezra's warm medals and my grandmother's old wedding dress, I found a plain manila envelope marked Lake Property, Important. Inside were Ezra's original handwritten survey notes and beautifully detailed hand-drawn maps. A trip to the county courthouse felt like striking gold. With the help of Betty, the clerk who still remembered my great-grandfather, I pulled the 1952 land patents. What we discovered made my heart race. Ezra hadn't just bought an island. He had secured the mineral and water rights to the entire lake bed. Those rights had never been transferred or sold. They were still legally mine. Every boat that touched the water near the resort, every swimmer in their beach area, every drop pumped through their fancy fountain was using my family's property without permission. Even better, the original deed included a perpetual easement for bridge access that could never be revoked by any HOA or neighborhood committee. Older rights like these often trump newer regulations, and I decided to test that theory. Using Ezra's exact 1952 blueprints, I began rebuilding the bridge plank by plank. The sound of my hammer echoing across the lake felt like a battle cry. Cordelia responded quickly, arriving with a sheriff's deputy and accusing me of environmental destruction. She filmed me for social media, calling it eco-terrorism. What she didn't realize was that I had been quietly filming every interaction too. While she waged war online with petitions and rumors, I filed paperwork to officially record my water rights. That filing also let me charge rent for use of the lake bed. Suddenly, her entire luxury resort was operating on land I legally owned. Her campaign escalated into full social warfare, but I fought back by hosting free boat repair workshops every Saturday, rebuilding real relationships with neighbors over coffee and wrenches. At the Historical Society, I met Marcus Rivera, a retired environmental scientist whose 3 years of data proved the resort had caused serious damage to the lake, dropping oxygen levels, declining fish populations, and reduced water clarity. The lake had actually been healthier when our modest bridge stood. The town council hearing was packed. Cordelia presented glossy slides about progress and property values. When she lost her temper and called local families hillbillies who lived in the past, the room went silent. She had just insulted half the county. Still, the pressure continued with fraudulent liens and a lowball offer to buy our property. That's when I hired Winston Clearwater, a sharp retired environmental lawyer. His investigation uncovered the truth. Our family had never joined the HOA. The covenants protected pre-existing structures, and the bridge demolition had been based on completely fake paperwork. We filed a strong countersuit. Then came the real revelation. Winston's deeper research showed that the resort had been built illegally on federally protected wetlands with falsified permits. It was operating far beyond its approved capacity and dumping untreated waste into the lake. The docks, swimming areas, and septic systems all sat on our family's lakebed. For 3 years, Cordelia had been running a criminal operation on our property while trying to drive us out. We formed a quiet war council around my grandmother's kitchen table. Winston with his briefcase, Marcus with water testing equipment, Dolores with decades of old photographs, and Sage Moonbeam, the local newspaper editor eager to expose the corruption. We documented every violation with 24/7 monitoring, time-lapse cameras, and careful evidence collection. I issued formal rent notices. My grandmother shared heartbreaking before and after photos of the lake. Sage prepared the media plan. Cordelia grew desperate. She sent a private investigator, vandalized my workshop, spread vicious rumors, and even tried to stage a fake environmental spill near Ezra's gravesite to justify seizing our land. But our hidden cameras caught everything, and real EPA agents arrived in time to witness the deliberate contamination. The climax came during the resort's big Labor Day shareholders meeting. 200 investors and officials gathered in the glass pavilion as Cordelia stood confidently at the podium, announcing her $10 million expansion plans. That's when I walked in uninvited, carrying my great-grandfather's old leather briefcase. When she claimed the last obstacle had been removed, I stood up and held up the 1952 deed. I explained that my family owned the water and mineral rights to the entire lake bed beneath her resort. Marcus projected the damning environmental data. Then FBI agents entered and placed Cordelia under arrest for violations of the Clean Water Act, fraud, and conspiracy. I served formal notice that all operations on my property had to cease within 48 hours. The entire meeting was being live-streamed to hundreds of thousands of people online. 6 months later, the resort is gone. The EPA shut it down, and the property was sold to pay restitution. Today, it stands as the Ezra Thorne Memorial Nature Center, a public preserve and educational facility dedicated to protecting the lake. The lake has healed dramatically. Fish populations have surged, water clarity has returned, and toxic algae blooms have vanished. My grandmother lived long enough to see justice and give tours, passing peacefully on the rebuilt bridge with the words, "Ezra would be proud." I expanded my workshop into a teaching space where young people learn traditional craftsmanship. We established the Ezra Thorne Environmental Foundation with part of the settlement to help other families fight HOA abuse and illegal developments. The old bridge now stands stronger than ever, a symbol of resilience and the power of ordinary people who refuse to be bullied. Some fights are worth having. Some bridges are worth rebuilding. And sometimes, when regular people stand up and fight smart, justice really does win in the end. The morning mist still rises off Clearwater Lake, the loons call across the water, and I stand on that bridge feeling the solid planks beneath my feet, knowing 3 generations built this life, and 3 more will follow because we refuse to let greed win.